Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by Beavers Edge campus insider Ryan Harlan as we're here to preview Oregon State and Kentucky in the Super Regionals this weekend. Going to be a great three-game series in Lexington, and we're going to dive into the nitty-gritty of it. Want to welcome Ryan Harlan to the podcast. Good to see you, Ryan. How are things?
Busy. It's that time of year. Terms wrapping up. Super regionals in full swing
Yeah.
officially now after a kind of chaotic
Mm-hmm.
quarterfinals regional, at least to the end there, with suspension of play due to the rain and finishing up on Monday. But nonetheless, excited though for Saturday.
Yeah, it certainly turned out to be quite the long weekend, Ryan, with the Beavers still only playing technically three games, right? They didn't lose any games, didn't get forced to any extras, but obviously had a Friday night game, the 10-4 win over Tulane on Friday night. Beavers come back on Saturday, take the first game against UC Irvine 5-3. Start the game on Sunday. Ryan, I think it's kind of funny that you and I had been talking because I was going to come down to Sunday's game, and I had told you what was my biggest fear of that game? And the
The
ultimate
rate,
reason
the
I wasn't able to
weather,
get down
yeah,
was that
yeah.
delay. And nevertheless, first game I've seen play suspended at Goss Stadium. I mean, maybe some games in like March, early in the year where it's cold and rainy, maybe a lightning occasion here or there. But Ryan, it's rare to see play suspended at Goss, even
Oh
with
yeah, yeah.
the rain that we get here in the Pacific Northwest. So that was a bit baffling. Beaver fans were noticeably upset, and I understand why. If you were at the ballpark and you drove down on a Sunday night, and you know this, Ryan, many people have jobs. They can't just come back at
Yeah,
noon on a Monday.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I completely understand the fans' frustration there. It's just kind of one of those things where you just kind of shrug your shoulders, say it kind of stinks for everyone involved, and nevertheless, Oregon State ends up getting the 11-6 win on Monday and closing out the Corvallis Regional with 3 wins. So, Ryan, obviously you were there for those games. I'm curious just kind of your takeaway from there at Goss Stadium. What was kind of the vibe, and are you seeing the kind of like I could tell from Travis Bazana after the post game? I think it was either Saturday or Monday, where he was just kind of mentioned like maybe it was Mitch. It's like Travis isn't letting this team lose right now, and he made a comment something like, "We're going to be really hard to beat when we play this way." Like that's the kind of things that leaders say as they take their team to Omaha. So are you kind of seeing the seeds of that starting to get sprinkled a little bit this last weekend, or are they on that path?
I've been seeing that a little bit from Travis. I mean, Travis is like the heartbeat of this team. Like he provides, I can't even like explain like the intensity and like energy that he brings. Like there's no
Right.
one word to like describe it. Like seeing him that what likely is his final at bat at Goss,
Yeah.
just the like intensity that he had there and arguing a little bit with the umpire over some calls and how heated he was
Yeah.
afterwards too. Like I felt that, and I was kind of and I was sitting way far back behind over the press box. Like
Right.
I really do think that this team has hit their stride or has started to hit their stride as they need it here in this postseason, especially with a run to Omaha and on the road too. And you reminded me of that Sunday game. It was funny, like just hearing all the fans boo, and then too at the same time, I heard somebody yell like, "I work tomorrow," and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, "I have class tomorrow." But luckily, shout out to my professor for letting me get to get to that game on
Yeah.
Monday. That was luckily I was able to make it there. But like, yeah, it was very really rare to see that. Even
Yeah.
in my experience there, I'm like rain. I'm like this is normal. Like,
Right.
but then again, UC Irvine had been out in the rain pretty much all day,
Right. Yeah.
so it
And
was like
and
okay, fair. But yeah,
yeah.
like to circle back around to that, like that's definitely what I've kind of seen. And Travis pours himself into other players on the roster as well too. Kind of gets that like Mitch was kind of saying it's almost like very like positive energy, speaking that out into existence, and everybody picks up on that. And like even with like Elijah Hainline, who was playing in his first regional
Right.
ever, like Travis was helping him out there, and he saying such positive things about Hainline in post game. Like it shows that he really cares about this team, and he wants this team to get to Omaha and get to get to that final game of holding up the trophy and having that dog pile there. Like that's what the goal is. That's what they've been saying all year, and that's what they've been visualizing this entire time. Like, and I think this team is definitely at least capable of making it back there, even on the road, not necessarily at cost, but even on the road. I think they have the capability. It's just everybody doing their part to make it there.
Right. And again, we'll kind of dive into the challenge ahead. And as Ryan just alluded to, I mean, again, Oregon State baseball, not to downplay the history of the past, but it's actually relatively easy to just kind of look at recent history because Oregon State is a 20th century or 21st century, excuse me, baseball team as far as, what they've accomplished and all the national titles and NCAA appearances since 2000. And obviously you've got the College World Series appearance in the 50s and all that. But just more recently, this is when they've ushered in their era as a dominant team. And, Ryan, to that point, I found it interesting that, they had never won a super regional on the road to this point. Granted, the format wasn't the same back in the days and it was kind of different, but still haven't won a super regional on the road. And then haven't made Omaha without it going through Corvallis in some way, shape, or form. So, there are kind of some firsts at stake here, which I think is very cool for a program that, is one of the nation's blue bloods, for lack of better terms. And I'm curious too, Ryan, how well do you think the Beavers were prepared for what they'll see in Lexington this weekend when you consider that UC Irvine was basically like the next five, I would say, of teams that nearly hosted, right? So UC Irvine was a solid test for the Beavers as far as like their RPI. I'm pretty sure it's top 25. Yes, it is. And, having to play them twice. Tulane as well, but I know Tulane obviously got in as the 4 seed for a reason, and then never had to end up playing Nichols. But I'm just curious if you think that, Irvine was a good test for the Beavers, just specifically offensively, because that Irvine offense could hit and they could
Yeah.
really light up the scoreboard. So I think the fact that Oregon State held them to what they held them to in those 2 games, I think that's got to give them some confidence or just extra confidence heading into this weekend.
Oh, I would agree, and I think initial impressions of the Corvallis regional before we got underway was it's going to be a very offensive heavy regional, and that's not to even like discount or look ahead over like at that point in time like Nichols or
Sure,
Tulane. Irvine was really the one that I was a little concerned about how Beavers would match up prior to any games
sure.
being played, and especially too that Irvine team can win on the road to having over what
Yeah.
20
I
road
think they
wins. That's some
tops in the
yeah,
country, I think. Yeah, it was very
yeah,
impressive.
that's some very impressive. And so I think that shows that they've at least the pitching staff in particular has gotten so much better to
Yeah.
limiting high powered offenses from capitalizing on their mistakes. Like there was only a two innings that I can really think of where like Beavers weren't that great pitching wise, other than like the rest of the game where they
Right.
were solid overall,
Right.
especially with guys coming in the bullpen and doing their thing. Like that third inning against Tulane where they put up 4 runs and then Aiden May bounces right back afterwards. And then that
Right.
first inning, obviously on Sunday, and Segura puts up 2 zeros in both the second and third inning to keep Irvine off the board. But like outside of that, really, it wasn't really a whole lot that I saw like caused for concern from
Sure.
the pitching staff in particular. And I know at least for Irvine's sake, like they had ran through the gauntlet of the elimination bracket and they were kind of running on fumes. Like they brought out their ace, Nick Pinto, who pitched on Friday, and
Yes.
he
Yes.
got shelled. So there was a little bit of that, but I think it was a good kind of measuring stick to see where this team is at in on the road to Omaha, essentially.
No, and then you brought up a great point about them bringing back Nick Pinto because, there have been times past where that Friday ace and like a winner take all game on Monday is like, hey, give me the ball, coach. And you're like, how is he doing this after throwing, 100 that with Nick Pinto this weekend looked to be a little bit more like, yeah, you could tell he didn't really have much gas left in the tank. So that ended up working out very fortunately for the Beavers. And to your point on the pitching, yeah, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, at least early on. The great news for Beaver fans is we shift back to a best of three format. Oregon State now has two pitchers, Ryan, that are playing at a level that any team in the country would like to have them as their number one or number two option. Because, I mean, you talk about what Aiden May has really done, but really Aiden May and Jacob Komatz, what they both have done since that Civil War series back end of April has been quite impressive. Just, like they've had some moments here and there where it hasn't been perfect, but they both won those big games when they needed to beat Oregon because that was a huge series back in the regular season where the winner of that series was probably going to get the edge to host, and look at how it ended up turning out. But Aiden May now has settled into, obviously had the injury, missed some time early in the season, but he's now settled into everything you'd want an ace to be. You love the ferocity, excuse me, on the mound. He's got great body language. He's excited. He's fired up. Guys are willing to kind of run through a wall for him. And then, Jacob Komatz, I made the point this last Saturday, Ryan, we were talking on the damn board. This is a guy who's probably just dying to be out there pitching in the postseason after, again, not his fault, but Ryan, you remember well, if they had Jacob Komatz, they might have been able to take down LSU. That's how close that series was with Oregon State having subpar pitching. You knew that Jacob Komatz was going to be fired up for pitching, again in the postseason. And, arguably he turned in a performance that I think would rival Aiden May on Friday night. So to have those two guys as kind of the head of your spear, head of your dragon, so to speak. And then, if there's one area that you wanted to maybe look a little bit critically, it was how Eric Segura started the game on Sunday, but he was able to kind of rally a little bit before that game got suspended. And, the Beavers were able to match those runs and kind of give him some support before the game did get suspended. So to be honest with you, Ryan, we'll get into the kind of the middle relievers and closers in a minute. But as far as the starting pitching is concerned, I have zero concerns Friday, Saturday. A little bit with Segura on Sunday, a little, because I'm curious to see how he's going to play in a ballpark that can hold 7,000. It's going to be a big atmosphere difference compared to, what we saw last week at Goss, for instance. But yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on just the kind of the starting trio, Ryan.
You mentioned Komatz, and he was saying that like he was fired up to be out there. Like,
Yeah.
and he even said too, watching the Baton Rouge regional was hard
Yeah.
from Corvallis, and knowing that he wanted to be out there pitching and being injured,
Yeah.
wasn't able to do that. And really, like both guys, both Aiden May and Komatz, just have been kind of on another level a
Right.
little bit. And I kind of, and speaking of May, like he does it was something that I think Canham said before the start of the season, before he named May as the Friday guy,
Mm-hmm.
was the qualities that he has between past Oregon State pitchers. He was like he's a mix of Kevin Abel and
Yeah.
Trent Sellers together.
Yeah.
And I've seen that, and I kind of saw that from especially two on two for Tulane. and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
even like even at some points throughout the season, that Oregon game where he had a career high in strikeouts, over 20, what was it, 21, 22 strikeouts, like
It was a big number. Yeah, I can't.
yeah,
Yeah, it
it
was a
was,
big number.
yeah, just being there for that. I'm like, he was so he was so locked in and so focused that like
Yeah.
when he's on, he's hard for opposing hitters to attack. Like that is the biggest thing from him. And Komat's like same thing as well too. Seeing that energy that he brought off the mound on against UC Irvine, like you could tell that like
Yeah.
that meant a lot
And
to
a ton.
him.
Yeah. No, totally.
Yeah, and those are the two guys that I definitely think are going to be relied upon Friday and Saturday in a big fashion. And then with Segura, I wouldn't say like super concerned, but more of like, hey, you got some of those early jitters out. You're now on the road. You're now in a more hostile environment. Can you replicate what you had innings 2 through 3
Right.
through a 6, maybe 7 inning stretch, depending
Right.
on if it gets to a game 3. Um, just that sort of thing, and not letting the moment get too
Right.
big. But I also think too that was a great learning moment for him. And really the biggest thing that I was looking for was how would he respond? And he put up those 2 zeros in the second and
Right.
third inning. So he finally got a little bit into a groove there, and also had help with, the offense as well,
Right.
putting up a few runs to get that game back within reach. So Segura's definitely kind of a question mark if it gets to a
Sure.
3 game series, but I think if you're Oregon State and you have great performances from May and Komatsu, you won't need to get to that point, but
Right.
this is college baseball. Anything can happen.
Oh, totally.
So
And I've seen Oregon State, mostly just from my own experience. I've seen them take 2 games and go straight to Omaha. I've seen them drop the first game, win 2 in a row, go to Omaha. So, college baseball, Ryan, is one of the most fascinating postseason formats because it is so. Like I said, I know you saw the same statistics that we saw, where it's like if you win the first 2 games of your regional, you have an 88% chance to win the regional.
yeah,
So it's like it is so hard to beat a team twice at the back end of a regional. But then, say you don't have elite top to bottom pitching. Then in super regional, you shift back to this best of 3 format, which is really like what the Beavers were so good at all season long, which is you just take 2 out of 3 in the weekend, right? You just take 2 out of 3. And more times than not this year, the Beavers were in position to take the Friday and Saturday games because of how well, Aiden May, again, I know he was gone for a chunk of the year, but recent memory, Beavers have been really good on Friday and Saturday nights with those guys leading the way. And we'll kind of get into the matchups here momentarily with the numbers. But yeah, just my final thought on those two. Those two guys are playing at a high enough level right now, Ryan. It would not surprise me to see them go out. And I'm not saying put out shutout complete game gems, but give performances on I keep saying Friday, Saturday, on Saturday and Sunday, the two games that are scheduled. And no, Beaver fans, you don't need to adjust your computers. It is a 9 p.m. Kentucky time first pitch on Sunday night, which is crazy bizarre, but hey, at least it's 6 o'clock for the Beavers here. Right, that's gonna be
Pac-12
the
after
latest.
dark.
Yeah, that's gonna be the
Pac-12
latest
after
I've ever.
dark in SEC country.
Yeah, like I'm just going to assume it's like playing here, and plenty of games are played at 6, 7, and 8 o'clock here. I've never seen a 9 o'clock first pitch, so that's going to be interesting. But nevertheless, it is a Saturday, Sunday, Monday series. So considering that the Beavers did play Monday, even it was not a whole fourth game, but just continuation of the third, I think that turned out to work in their favor a little bit, give their guys an extra day rest. But yeah, I would not be surprised if those two guys give them a chance to win the first 2 games simply for how well they're pitching. A chance, we'll get into the numbers, but I think the Beavers will have a chance to win their first 2, and not push it to 3 if those guys play like they've been playing lately.
Oh no, agreed. Like, and then too, you got to look at the middle relievers, guys coming out of the bullpen, who's going to be that first guy out there, and then for
Good point.
them to continue on what both May, Kamats, and even Segura started out on. So those are
Who do you like?
those
Who do
are
you like
definitely
the
going to be
most?
some guys.
Yeah, who do you like the most coming out of the bullpen right now? Both of these,
Keljo,
obviously, we know Bridger Holmes is going to be the closer.
yeah,
There's not really much
I
debate there.
really like Keljo.
Yeah, me
Keljo
too.
has found another level
Yeah, I like him a
where
lot too.
like where he saw some significant stretch over the regional, and like just having a lefty who can
Right.
throw in the 90s coming out of the bullpen,
Yeah.
and just be kind of that tone setter. Like Segura was saying, I think in availabilities this week, that like when Nelson's on the mound, he's at a different level than everybody else out there. Like he switches on that competitive mindset, and like hearing him in the presser when he spoke, just very soft spoken, mild mannered, just like the stark difference between the
Yeah.
two. Like he's a guy that can come out there and deliver you a solid 3, 4 innings if need be. Like
Right.
that's definitely like a guy that I'm definitely like looking forward to be relied upon in a big way, in addition to Bridger, if
Right.
Bridger needs to be called out there in a 1 run or two
Sure.
run game.
Definitely. And again, you mentioned the lefty. I mean, that's just it. If there's one, criticism from afar on Oregon State's roster, it's not a lot of lefty pitchers. Like that's just, there's I think three, maybe four, and only one guy who's actually had much run this season. So, and that being Keljo. So, just hearkening me back to some of the Pat Casey days. There were times when there were lefty and a lefty on a Friday Sunday kind of a thing, and they would kind of alternate based on where they were. So I do think having a left-handed pitcher is extremely important. I think Nelson Keljo, like you said, can really fill it up. Got a great velocity on his pitches. The location seemed like he tightened it up a little bit too, which was key. And that's my if I have any concern with Bridger Holmes, it's that he has a tendency to be wild a little bit sometimes. And I mentioned that in our takeaways piece that Ryan and I did earlier this week over at Beavers Edge. Definitely make sure to check that out as we kind of preview the Lexington, Kentucky regional. But Bridger Holmes had times when he's come in and looked fantastic, and times when there's so much movement on those pitches that maybe they doink a guy or two. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was kind of, I think, that final game where he came in
Yeah.
and where it looked like it was almost all
A
then
little
wrapped
bit of
up, and
tension,
then
just a little
that
bit.
that that hit by pitch, and then
Yep.
then gets the final batter out to end the
Yeah.
game. But if Bridger can kind of cut down on that a little bit there, in those moments, it's going to be huge when he's on and when he's working. Like, I think it was the first UC Irvine game. I don't remember who the batter was.
Sure.
Name escapes me, but just I think it was the slider that he threw, just an absolute sword of a
Yes.
strikeout where he made him look so silly. Just cut him down right at the
Yep.
knees. Where I'm like,
Yep.
just I was like, well, it's
He's got
so
he's got filthy
nasty.
stuff. He's got
Yeah,
filthy stuff. I mean, the
yeah,
movement on Bridger Holmes's pitches, it's up there with some of the great Oregon State pitchers I've seen. The fact that it can start and end here, I mean, it's crazy. I would there's a reason he is a closer for a top 16 left in the country baseball team, because that is incredible. But yeah, other guys, a couple other guys, Joey Munt would be a guy I'd watch too, who could be called up on. We talked to Mitch Cannon about AJ Lattery. It didn't sound like it was a serious injury, but I don't know if we'll see him this weekend. Hard to say. Kellen Oakes is another guy who was warming up and saw a little bit this last weekend. Outside of that, I'm not sure how much deeper, maybe Jaron Hunter, they'll go into the quote unquote pen in a 3-game series. You know what I mean?
yeah. That was definitely like probably I would say a bit of an advantage a
Yeah,
little bit, having
it
some of those
is.
guys like Kellen Oakes, Jaron Hunter not really be used
Right.
during the regional and could be called upon
Sure.
later if needed in there. And at least for Lattery, good to hear, because anytime you see a pitcher walk off with trainer, you kind of assume the worst, but
Yeah,
sounded like it was minor and just kind of precautionary of like, hey, we don't want to extend this out more than we need to.
exactly. And that's still a thing where, again, if something happens and or one of the pitchers that is expected to start, gets shelled early or something like that, you may need somebody, to come in. And the other part of it is there could be a game where like Oregon State or Kentucky, maybe one team gets out to a big like 7-0 lead, and that other team's like, all right, we're gonna hold our ace, right? And decide, there's lots of gamesmanship that can kind of happen in a 3-game series, and you could see one team get off to a big lead and they go, okay, we're gonna circle back and go towards the next 2 games. So the gamesmanship in a 3-game series is going to be very interesting between these two head coaches and two teams. Before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of Kentucky, I want to kind of take a look at the team by team comparison, Ryan. And again, baseball is not entirely numbers, but if you're looking at the numbers, you got to think Oregon State has a pretty good chance in this series to at least, be competitive and perhaps win the thing. Just kind of a quick statistical comparison. The Beavers hit just over 300 as a team. Kentucky hits 290 as a team. Beavers almost have 200 more runs scored, almost 200 more hits, almost 40 more home runs. Offensive, OBP and slugging pretty close. Beavers also win ERA, 4.17 versus Kentucky's 5.32. Whip pretty much the same. Kentucky's walked a few more batters than the Beavers, and Kentucky struck out a few more batters than the Beavers. But just on the surface, Ryan, like there's obviously plenty of reasons we'll get into, why Kentucky's been successful this year. But when you just look at the numbers, you're not like, hey, this is David versus Goliath, which you might think when you look at Oregon State being a 15 seed and Kentucky being the number 2 national seed. You might think that's a chasm, but really, when you look at the numbers, it's not.
Yeah, also two numbers always never tell
It's
the
true.
tale of the tape too much, but kind of you get that initial first glance and you're like, wait a second, this is winnable.
Right.
Like it's not like facing, say, like a Tennessee or an
Mm-hmm.
Arkansas, but even though Arkansas, yeah, lost their
Right.
regional, they had a tough matchup there where you like kind of look at the staff and you kind
Oh
of look
yeah.
at like
They're really,
who
really
they
good.
have and those are kind of the things where you're like where that kind of comes into play. But I really do think that the and yeah, we'll get a little more into like the nitty gritty of it, but like the way the lineup is constructed for Oregon State is enough to have success and enough to do damage, I think, against anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And they 1 through 9, they're all difficult to hit because each guy can make you
Go
pay if
yard.
you focus all your attention on Travis Bazan. And of course, rightfully so, deserves all of it. But like at the same time, you can't, overlook McDowell, Turley, Macias,
Mm-hmm.
even Elijah Hainline. Like you can't overlook those guys because they're just able to do the same thing. And I know the walks is a little bit different, but Beavers can get on base just as
They
well as any
can.
other team.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
not will always go for the long ball, but if they can draw a walk, they'll gladly take it.
Oh yeah, no, and again with that point, like Kentucky's pitchers have walked some guys this year, so that could be an advantage for Oregon State to try to eke out walks, get guys on base, and then those home runs matter more. We'll get into Kentucky's kind of offensive standouts here in a minute, but kind of looking at who the Wildcats will likely trot out Saturday night. We don't have it officially, but Ryan and I have kind of summarized that we think it'll be Trey Poozer who's on the mound for the Wildcats on Friday night. 3.77 ERA, coming in with, let's see here, 71 strikeouts against 30 walks, so about a 2-to-1 strikeout ratio. It's pretty good. You and I have kind of determined he's probably their best starting pitcher as far as ERA, distance, innings pitched, all that stuff. So we expect him to probably go. Behind him, we would expect combination of Mason Moore and Dominic Neiman, who both pitched this past weekend for the Wildcats as well. But again, as I mentioned, their team ERA, Ryan, there's is 5.32. There's potential for scoring runs against this group, and you mentioned it as well. They're very disciplined. They play small ball. They know how to get outs when it matters most, and it just seems like they're a really good technical team to be this good and this dominant in the SEC without putting up just ridiculous, ludicrous numbers. So that tells me they're very well coached. They have very smart players. And, I think it absolutely will still be a challenge for Oregon State, but this is a winnable series. Even when you look at like their ace pitcher and Poozer in this case, solid numbers, but not unattainable numbers. So I do think that if Oregon State goes in with confidence, Ryan, we could see, a relatively good series for Oregon State.
No, agreed. And even too, like discipline and good coaching is a good thing, but when you get to the postseason, I think it's being able to make those tough plays, those tough outs, getting who essentially who
Who
wants
wants
it
more?
more.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's really what I think this is going to come down to. And sure, like very disciplined team, but at the same time, if things aren't going your way, how do you respond? And sure, Kentucky had some of those moments in their regional, but like you can't always find yourself being in that coming from behind in a lot of those, or
right.
getting those almost sort of giving up those little open doors of late rallies to come through. Like you if against a team like Oregon State, where if you don't if you take your foot off the gas or if you don't pay attention to them at all in one aspect or another, I think it's going to be a long day for Kentucky if Oregon State is just completely dialed in and focused throughout this
Right.
3 game series. I think it's going to be a very, very long day.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a good point too. I mean, like you said, Oregon State's offense doesn't stop. Now, Kentucky does have the pitchers to slow it down. They've seen the best hitters in the country all year.
Yeah.
That is an undeniable fact. Is, as much as us, we love to say, West Coast baseball, outside of Oregon State, y'all can, and Stanford, y'all can kind of take a seat. Like SEC baseball is where it's at, and that's top to bottom, the best league each and every year. There's occasionally some cases where it's the West Coast a little bit better, but that's where I think Kentucky has seen players like Travis Bazzana this season. Not exactly, but like Travis Bazzana. They've seen lineups like this season. And again, to have the record that they had through conference play tells me they really haven't had many slip ups. I mean, you and I can look back, Ryan, and go, yep, Oregon State series against Cal, massive slip up. Oregon State series against USC, massive slip up. You look at
Mhm.
Kentucky's schedule, you really can't find those. So, that's the thing. They've been very consistent all year. And we'll get into I'll get into kind of the big topic that I want to kind of leave Ryan and all of you with when we close. But just let's go over to their offense real quick, Ryan. We mentioned Ryan. We mentioned Ryan Waldschmidt as one of Kentucky's kind of go-to players. Nick Lopez really seem to be the kind of engine that drive that Kentucky offense. They've got 96 RBIs between them, but then again, you look at it, they got about 5 or 6 guys, that are relatively dangerous, not necessarily big home run threats, as you kind of mentioned to me earlier, but, very much like Oregon State, they got a solid offensive lineup.
Very solid. They're the one player that leads them in home runs, Ryan Nicholson with 20. So somewhat comparable to Travis Bazzana
Yeah.
with like how many home runs Travis has on the season.
Yeah.
And then Ryan Waldschmidt with 14. And then the rest of the guys are kind of really all within the same average,
Yeah.
want to say there. Like next closest to double digits is Emilian Petre.
Yeah.
So outside of really only maybe a few guys, like that, there's not a lot of deep home run threats, but a lot enough to put the ball in play into the gap or lay down a squeeze bunt, like those kind of plays where the fundamentals I think are going to be really big in this game, especially trying to slow down that Kentucky offense for Oregon State.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge. And again, like we said, it's not necessarily hitting out of the park. It's just guys that know how to make good contact, guys that know how to get around the bases, know how to bring opponents in. I mean, you're talking, just their top guys, 46 RBI, 50, 54, 43, 58, 37, 34, 35. That's like 8 guys that you could feel pretty confident, being able to get in runs. So that's where we mentioned earlier, Aiden May and Jacob Kmatz and the rest of the pitching staff, can't let Kentucky get going because, Kentucky can score too. And, you obviously have to be able to score to be as successful as they were in the SEC this year. But as we look to wrap up this podcast, and again, big shout out to everyone for joining me and Ryan on this edition of the Edge podcast, previewing Oregon State versus Kentucky in the Super Regionals. Ryan, we're going to talk about we're going to close on this topic that I kind of mentioned to you before we started. Will there be undue pressure on Kentucky to clinch a berth in Omaha? And I only say this because Kentucky historically, folks, like again, do the math. Oregon State's not playing Florida. They're not playing LSU. They're not playing South Carolina. They're not playing Mississippi State, not one of the blue bloods, and no disrespect to Big Blue Nation and Kentucky, but not one of the blue bloods of SEC college baseball. Kentucky's not had a lot of team success in college baseball, never made the College World Series, never won a super regional. So, with that, Ryan, considering that Oregon State still has a handful of guys who experienced the heartbreak of Auburn 2 years ago, and the fact that maybe Kentucky wins the game, and then maybe when they're one game away, do you think this is something where they're so focused it doesn't matter? Or after maybe say they win Saturday and maybe, Oregon State wins the next game and it's a winner take all on Monday, would there be undue pressure on Kentucky knowing that they could be the first in their program? Like, does that add pressure, or is it like an opportunity, do you think, in your opinion?
I I I think if I were kind of in the head coach's shoes and I was kind of a program
Yeah,
that had not a lot of success, I mean, I feel like there is that expectation. I think there's always that expectation to succeed and to make it to, in this case, to Omaha in that realm where like what's at stake.
right.
But at the same time, I think part of it is just them going out and executing.
Yeah,
I really think that that's what it is there because I know even for that Auburn regional, it was kind of a like, hey, the Beavers haven't been back to Omaha in a while.
yep,
This is the chance to do it, and I could kind of feel it in
yeah.
the air for that game three.
And
I
Auburn took it from
think,
them. They
yeah,
did.
took it from him, and so I feel like if you have a team that hasn't experienced a lot of success, I think that pressure can get to them.
Yeah,
But I don't know how much of a factor that will play in like the grand scheme of things. I
right.
really
Yeah,
think it's kind of if it gets to that point, who's going to make that play? Who's going to come up big? And in that Corvallis Super Regional in 2022, that was Sonny DeCharia, who
yep.
with a big momentum play to
That
swing the
dude,
game in
that dude could
Auburn's
swing a bat,
favor.
man. That dude could swing a baseball
Yeah,
bat. I remember it very
yeah.
well.
So I think it's going to come down to those guys, and I really do think that at least for Oregon State's case in particular, if it has to come down to that, those guys know like, hey, we've been here before. We know what it
Right,
takes. We know what happened last time when we were here. Time to rewrite that and punch our ticket to Omaha. Like
right.
that's what I think it's going to come down to. Like because the Beavers have been in that type of game and that type of experience before, and I think that plays a factor to a degree, but I
Yeah,
really do think it's just going to come down to execution by
totally.
both
And I think
teams
it
at the
is
end of
one
the
of those
day.
things where it could go downhill either way, right? So as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, this Kentucky group with a lot of the players from last year made the super regionals and they went down to LSU. Again, Beavers, we know all about playing LSU last year. Paul Skeens. It turns out, Ryan, that dude pretty good. Just gonna
Yeah, the
just gonna
biggest what if I'll have is it was kind of in my time covering the Beavers, especially baseball, like what if Oregon State could have landed him? That's the biggest what
Oh,
if I think I
yeah,
will ever have.
that would have changed
Yeah,
things just a little bit. But to that point, like Kentucky got absolutely shelled by
yeah,
LSU last year in the Super Regional. So it could go both ways where it's like maybe they believe now playing at home, if they get up on Oregon State, they'll have the belief. Or maybe it's the other way where even playing at home, say Oregon State wins the first game big, maybe that's something where it's like, here we go again, kind of a thing. So I'm very curious to see where Kentucky's kind of mental psyche is, simply for the fact that this is not an area where they are super experienced in. But nevertheless, it's going to be fascinating, Ryan. And I'm going to be glued to my TV Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock. I know you will be too, as
yeah.
ESPNU, ESPN Plus, 3 o'clock local time here on the West Coast for the Beavers in Kentucky on Saturday. And yeah, no, it's going to be a fantastic matchup. And appreciate you, Ryan, for jumping on this edition of the Edge podcast and chit chat and previewing this game, man. It's going to be exciting to break this one down.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I really do think that this game, at least this series in particular, can make it to three with both of these squads
Yeah.
together. I really do think it can. Like
So
I
yeah,
I, I
we
don't think
could
it's out of the
be.
question.
Yeah, we could be in store for some great baseball this weekend. So again, big shout out to Ryan Harlan. Appreciate you amidst your busy week jumping on talking some ball, man. Definitely make sure to stay tuned to Ryan and I as we'll both be keeping you guys up to date with everything latest happening in Oregon State at BeaversEdge.com. So again, thanks to everyone for tuning in to this edition of the Edge Podcast.